Hey everyone, it's me, Buster Green, and today I have a random unscripted video about something that's really interesting to me. So, if you guys aren't familiar with Yoshiyuki Tomino, he is literally the man who created Gundam, he created Dunbine, he created Space Runaway Ideon, he created a bunch of really fucking kick-ass animes in the 70s, a couple in the 80s, and then as time goes on, he's been a little less productive. Now, apparently, this company called Full Frontal Moe, they're a anime news reporting agency. They ran into him at the Niigata International Animation Film Festival. Now, I'm not sure if there is a second Niigata International Animation Film Festival, but according to my notes, this happened in March. So it's possible this happened a few months ago and they're just publishing it now. Nonetheless, I'm super psyched up about this because usually whenever Tomino is interviewed, he says some really based and outlandish shit. And in this case, he's being interviewed by a foreign reporter. So he goes really way off the rails into basically a general rant about Hayao Miyazaki and French cinema, which I'm all about. So yeah, I'm just going to read through this. And if anything strikes my fancy, I'll stop midway and comment on it. But for the most part, I'm just going to be reading base Tomino as my head interprets him, and I guess I'll give the reporter like a British accent just to keep it straight. All right, so yeah. Starting off, Yoshiyuki Tomino is without a doubt one of the most famous and important directors in anime history, not just one of the creators of Gundam. He's an incredibly prolific creator whose work has impacted both robot anime and science fiction in general. During the second edition of the Niigata International Animation Film Festival, we had the opportunity to meet this legendary figure. It was quite the honor and so much nervousness, as Tomino is famous for his temper and bold opinions. But the person we met with was energetic, kind, and happy to discuss his work and his love of cinema with people from overseas. So yeah, here we go. Interview between Yoshiyuki Tomino and Ludovic Joyet. Mr. Tomino, I believe you're extremely talented when it comes to creating fictional universes and stories, and yet you keep doing robot stories your entire life. Why is that? That's because I never got any other job. You mean you never got any offers to do anything else? Yes. Also, I've always been aware that I basically don't have what it takes to be an auteur. There's this thing called the giant robot genre, and I thought it might serve as a good platform to create stories. So I ended up joining a place that specializes in that kind of works. It's not really what I aspired to do initially, considering my own abilities, but there was no other way to go. That's why the director Hayao Miyazaki has always been my enemy. Being in the same era as someone I thought I'd never surpass has become my incentive. But even though you've created so many successful works, I don't think you've ever had that freedom at Sunrise. Why don't you just go somewhere else? Well, certainly Sunrise as a company isn't a group of artists, it's a group of producers. So for someone like me, someone with such low artistic abilities, I could find support there. If I went to another studio, there's a lot of other creators I just wouldn't be able to compete with. But Miyazaki, he's not an artist, is he? He's more like a craftsman, I would say. You're wrong. I am? If he were a craftsman, he wouldn't have done something like The Boy and the Heron. If you say he's a craftsman, you don't know anything. He's an auteur. Look, he made an animated film without a happy ending. That's impossible if you do things half-heartedly. That's why I don't think I compare myself to an auteur like that. Maybe Miyazaki would rather compare himself to someone like Victor Hugo, but that's just for The Boy and the Heron. I don't even really like Miyazaki's other works either way. Well, Miyazaki never does originals either. Right, but this time he didn't follow the original book at all. He just made something more like his autobiography. He actually copied another novel besides How Do You Live? I know, look, they haven't hit it or anything, so it's not like there's anything wrong with it. Anyway, most movies nowadays are adapted from an original work. There aren't that many purely original movies. What about your own works, like Gundam and Ideon? I just made those things because I'm not a full-fledged auteur. Someone with real creative abilities, unlike me, would never do something like Gundam or Ideon. You can't just make a robot series because you like robots. I'm pretty confident about that. I'm going to change the subject a bit, but when you talk about films, I heard you were originally supposed to direct the Genma Tyson film. That's a lie. I've seen that story run somewhere, but I'm not the one who said that thing. It's just that I'm an acquaintance of the novel's author, Kazumasa Hirai. And since we were acquainted, but when I found out who he really is, I realized I shouldn't approach his work too much. Hey, MB interjecting here with a quick side note. So at this point, Tomino is talking about Kazumasa Hirai, who was a science fiction novelist. They apparently knew each other and lived in mostly the same time period. Hirai died a few years back in 2015. I'm not sure exactly why Tomino is implying an animosity towards him. As best as I can tell, Kazumasa is most famous for writing 8-Man with Jiro Kawada, Genma Tyson with Shotaro Ishinomori. He also wrote Spider-Man the manga, and now that he's dead, his most famous and remembered work is a werewolf manga he did called Wolf Guy, which was apparently pretty big in the 70s, but it was remembered well enough to have a legacy after that. I can't figure out why exactly Tomino has this animosity toward him. The only thing I can get in general is that he was kind of like a violent horror guy, and maybe Tomino's saying he's not into violent horror, unless he's implying that he knows something that we don't. Is it because you both like occult and ESP-related things? I guess that's how some people see new types, and actually some groups approached me when Ideon came out, but they're mistaken. I admit there's a possibility that if you push this epistemology to its ultimate conclusions, when you consider such works, it might end up close to the occult, but that's just actually psychological theory rather than the occult. I'm not really going in that direction. Now, with Ideon, the thing was... the last scene, it's like a procession of ghosts, and it might seem close to your occult sensibilities, but that's basically a mistake. In live action, you can't do something like that, but you can in animation. It's not just pictures. You have to go that far if you really want to convey something. Regardless of whether you believe in the occult or not, it's more that I believe that things like ghosts are something that we as humans always long after. And so in Ideon, I used the structure of a giant robot series, and I tried following that out. If there were actually ghosts, let's use them to conclude the story with a final twist. But today, there's not one critic who sees Ideon that ways. Nowadays, they just consider Ideon as any other robot show. When I was working on Ideon, I was sure I was about to lose my mind. Oh, actually, I have a question about Ideon. The power of the id, that's Freud's concept of the id, right? Of course it does. I mean, the name Ideon itself is just that, isn't it? And yet, I've never met any animation critic who's asked me that question. They just don't see it. Is it true? It is. I don't think any of my Japanese otaku friends know about it either, actually. They're just not learned enough. I wish they'd read at least one book by Freud. Did you read all of Freud's works? I'm not that smart, you know. I just read a couple. So, did you do any psychoanalysis? I did, by myself. To tell you what happened, so when I was working on Ideon, particularly the movies, I was sure I was about to lose my mind. That's how scary things were. I went so far into considering humans' passions and psychology that I thought I wanted to kill myself. I was unable to overcome that state of mind, but I could, thanks to the medium of animation. I could avoid annihilating my own physical existence in reality because animation was a fantasy where I could put all my thoughts in life and death. In that sense, I believe animation saved my life because it's completely fake. But some years ago, I rewatched all of Ideon, and I was quite surprised, and the reason was, to put in today's words, that I had made something absolutely amazing, and I actually thought it was the kind of work that actually shouldn't be made. Really? I don't think there are that many movies that discuss the complete annihilation of humankind so directly. I mean, the relentless annihilation of all life. When I was completing Ideon, I thought about that, and to put it in absolute terms, I absolutely did not want it to end in a Nietzschean world. What I thought about was how to avoid such a result. I came up with that ending, and I thought it would be visually beautiful, and it wouldn't come too close to reality, because I hadn't anticipated this final scene. I could portray complete annihilation without any reservation in the lead up to it. And I often get criticisms for it, such as like, why did you show a young child getting their head blown off? And the reason why is because without it, the ending would not work. Like, I mean, why is it all right when adults do that to each other, but as soon as it's a child getting its head blown off, people start whining about it. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I made Ideon with the intent of portraying the complete reality of the idea of what war is. I believe if Vladimir Putin had seen that scene, he would not have gone to war. Okay. Going back to Freud for a minute, where did you discover his ideas? Was it through Forbidden Planet? Oh, wow. I didn't think Forbidden Planet would come up. I started with Freud with the interpretation of dreams in high school, but I'm not that knowledgeable about his theory of psychoanalysis. But I'm surprised you're even bringing up the two together. Why are you asking about Forbidden Planet? Because I love sci-fi, and it's just a masterpiece, just like Ideon is.
Morbius, what is the id?
Young man, my daughter is planning a very foolish action, and she'll be terribly punished.
What is the id?
Id. It's an obsolete term. I'm afraid one's used to describe the elementary basis of the subconscious mind.
You know it is, but you know that ending, there's no lead up to it whatsoever, so it's just pure disrespect for the audience. I wanted to properly resolve it, so I made Ideon that way. You know I love Forbidden Planet, but only until that id story comes up. There's a scene where the id melts through an iron wall, and I really hate that shot. Is that so? Yes, the moment when the iron wall melts because of the heat, the way the wall feels, it's bad. It has to collapse for real. You got to remember how bad it was. Yo, Tomino is completely right about this. Like, this is the unedited scene, and look at how slow it's taking for the id to melt through the wall. Like, I gotta hand it to Tomino. Like, he probably hasn't seen this movie since he was a kid, and yet he remembers this horrible, badly produced scene perfectly. And wow, like, just look at how bad this is. Holy shit. Okay, I actually had to cut this shorter, but I timed it out over 4 minutes and 6 seconds for the id to actually melt through the wall. Okay, back to the interview now. Anyways, the id is a complicated question, and it's undeniably Forbidden Planet which taught me how to visually represent all the appetites at the core of human psychology. It really taught me if I didn't have memories from it, I certainly couldn't have made Ideon. But as I said, just for that last scene, I kept asking myself how far I could go in realism, and I thought I had to include a real massacre. Basically go all the way, and that's why it shows people getting shot right up into the face. There's no such thing in Forbidden Planet. I'd completely forgotten about it, but thinking about it now, I feel so bad that I was so influenced by Forbidden Planet. Entertainment is about liberating the audience while making them have some fun. You talked about happy endings earlier. Do you feel like you have to make some as well? No. Well, what I think is when you're watching a film, I used to like sad films and films that adhere to realism, but at some point, such films really aren't fun at all. Even if they're showing naked women, it's like, I feel like it's like, what is this realism all about? That's how Ideon became that way. There's nothing more to it. In that sense, cinematographical works are just like theater in a way. The basic idea might be to sell this sadness, make the audience cry, create psychological purification called catharsis. I acknowledge that this exists, but when considering what entertainment is, I guess I just remember this crazy thing. Wait, what? Okay, so one time I went to France and I went to this place called the Crazy Horse. Apparently the Crazy Horse is a nude cabaret in Paris, and it was great. Now, I realized there that entertainment is about liberating the audience while making them have some fun. And that's why I hate robot series, which are just about a monster destroying everything. There's a minimal set of rules you have to follow, and if you ask me what that is, I believe it's setting the priorities straight, considering the time period, and whether or not you want to acknowledge or dismiss ethnic and cultural differences. I'm not watching a lot of movies lately, but a film that has made me think you can go very far in fantasy, even with live action nowadays, that's Poor Things. So there are a lot of things you can't do, but okay, is it okay to go that far? That's how I felt. Yeah, actually, I watched Poor Things myself a few days ago. I'm probably not going to review it on the channel because the film is extremely pornographic and sexual in a way that I haven't seen modern Hollywood embrace in like literally over 20 years. But kind of a mindfuck of a movie. A little bit too long, and kind of, again, at its base, it's a super, super perverted retelling of Frankenstein. Also, I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet, though, but I understand what it's going for. I feel like that guy, Christopher Nolan, has finally become a full-fledged director, but Oppenheimer isn't fun. I think the approach of trying to grasp reality is the right one. Movies hold very strong ability to produce statements, or should I say create messages or even propaganda. And that's why right now the Japanese mistakenly think Oppenheimer is just about the atomic bomb. Is that why it's taken so long to release Oppenheimer in Japan? Yeah, the distributors must have thought it was just an awful film, but that only shows that they didn't look anything about it. It's about people. Regardless of Oppenheimer's genius as a physicist, in the end, after the war, he was rejected by society. That's the reason he became unhappy after he had to take the spotlight regarding issues related to the military and weapons of mass destruction. The fact the film industry is finally able to tackle such a subject makes Oppenheimer a very valuable film in my opinion. War is an important theme in your works as well. Most of your works appear to be anti-war, but looking at them more closely, they also acknowledge the necessity of using violence. Well, that's true. War is bad, but sometimes violence is necessary. Do I get it right? Well, look, I'll acknowledge the belief that violence is important for me. One of the foundations of my work, but the other thing is that film is basically spectacle, and which is to say it's action. So the story itself has to be dynamic. It has to be active, so it needs speed and destruction. As I was saying earlier, I don't like monster films. Some films just show one-sided destruction, and people producing these films are okay with that, but what are they thinking? Are they even thinking about the drama? Like, there's a lot of films like that. Films are entertainment, but it's necessary to consider them as a medium that can convey drama. So I don't really understand why people who like action, monster, or war films can just be satisfied with watching battles. But, well, I have to admit they exist after all, and I can't ignore how many battle scenes there are in my works. And the thing about wars is they won't end, will they? It'll just be like the Gundam series, going on forever. Well, look, Gundam is not just about war. Another thing I was trying to do was considering whether mankind can live forever on the finite planets such as Earth. I tried to put some realism into it already and basically find the words for it. 2 or 3 years before Gundam started, the Club of Rome was saying that in 80 years, oil of Earth will run out, and the idea that Earth was finite finally emerged. Even this year, in the statements they'd released, they're using such words, but none of that reflects what's actually going on in policies. In that sense, we're all like these stupid politicians, and I'm also including religions in that lot. Because I'm working in this genre called animation, I can say such things. It's time to be aware of these things, and we can't ignore them anymore. You can't say these things when you're bound by realism. Taking all that into account, I'm curious about the human bombs in Zambot 3. Were they inspired by the Lod Airport massacre by any chance? People carrying bombs around was a thing that already took place in World War II in Japan, so I wouldn't say that. I was not particularly intended to reference the Lod Airport massacre. Also, in older Japanese history, there's a story of the Bakudan Sanjushi, 3 soldiers who made a suicide bomb attack. Since I knew about all that, human bombs weren't anything special to me. Though doing such a thing in a kids show got people really angry at me. The studio said it was awful, they got angry at me, and I thought it was just crazy to show so much scenes of destruction in robot anime and not get into the topic. Like, for me, it was just natural. Just doing what seemed natural to me got me called a militarist, got me called right-wing, got me called nostalgic of Imperial Japan. But it's the contrary. Rather, it's that when I truly understood what destruction is, I needed to properly portray those topics. Whether destruction is a fundamental element, I'd like to talk about Gundam now, but it seems we're out of time. Okay, hey, I'm going to jump in here because I think this section probably requires the most context for what they're talking about. So the first thing is, Tomino's first fully directed anime was Zambot 3. Zambot 3 is a really fucked up show for both the 70s and today. It's about an invincible super robot piloted by 3 toddlers with guns with the vague guidance of their unhelpful and physically enabled grandfather. They end up getting ostracized by society like the X-Men, and they end up systematically failing to protect their friends and lovers. And the whole, It's a really fucking sad show. So probably some of the best episodes in Zambot 3 are episodes 16 through 18. This forms the human bomb arc. So this is literally the best part of the show. It starts off with episode 16. This is the start of the bomb arc. And all you really get explained here is that the Nazi-coded bad guys have planted these bombs inside of people to turn them into terrorist suicide bombers without them realizing it. And 16 is just explaining the idea of that, explaining it to the characters in the show, and the show characters being like, holy fuck, that's what they're doing? That's insane. Now, the arc gets really worse when you get to episode 17. In 17, Tomino really plays up the drama of it all, with various people freaking the fuck out, being like, oh my god, who's going to blow up? Are you a bomber? Am I a bomber? Anyone could be an unactivated suicide bomber. And worse than that, what if it is you? So it turns out, at the end of 17, there's this completely fucked scene where the shitty guy realizes that he was the human bomb all along, and he loses his shit over it. He ends up killing like nearly his entire neighborhood, just begging anyone to help him get the bomb out of himself as he dies crying like a bitch. And then this arc hits an absolute high climax in episode 18 when the butcher, who starts the episode putting on an Elvis tribute concert, returns Cape's girlfriend Aki to him, except now she's got a bomb inside her. And they know the bomb is inside her, but they make an exception for her because they love her. And they can't figure out how to get it out in time, and she dies in the middle of the night. She completely explodes, causing massive damage to their ship, and it drives the main character to a new emotional extreme that his child mind cannot possibly comprehend. Now, I'm a little bit rusty on this arc because I haven't seen Zambot since college, but I think after 18, that's kind of where it peaks, and then they kind of downplay the human bomb thing for the rest of the series. I'm not sure if they ever outright stop the bad guys from doing it, but those are the best episodes about it. Anyway, moving on to the Lod Airport Massacre. So this is something the interviewer brings up that I've never heard of before, and this is my first time processing it. So sorry if I don't do this justice, but this turns out to be a pretty nuts story. Now, I don't think I can do justice to it in a short side note like this, and I even feel a little bit icky even bringing it up because of the ongoing super violent Israel-Palestine war happening these days, but long story short, there was a terrorist attack in 1972 that took place in Israel at the Tel Aviv airport. But the interesting part about it is that the perpetrators in the attack were the Japanese Red Army, an independent communist militia that had sprung up in Japan. And somehow Palestine recruited them to attack Israel. But then they mostly ended up killing a group of Puerto Ricans who were in the airport randomly. And yeah, so that's the story in a nutshell. Israel and Palestine were fighting back then, and somehow this led to a proxy attack by Japanese communists on a group of Puerto Ricans in Israel. I kind of get, though, why Tomino completely blows off this reference, because Tomino wasn't trying to discuss that. He explains that the suicide bombers in Zambot were just a reference to suicide bombing, and the Lod incident wasn't a suicide bombing, it was a shooting spree. But I guess the interview brought it up because the dates were close. All right, moving on. Maybe you can't be a film director without a clear sense of where you're going. Sorry, okay, so to conclude, I'd like to ask you about your style. I believe it's changed a bit over the course of the 80s. Before that, you used to show things more directly, but then you started increasingly using surprising dialogues and cutting the transition between shots. I've always wondered if maybe you weren't influenced by the French Nouvelle Vague, particularly Godard. You know, I haven't seen a lot of Godard, but I absolutely love his first film, Breathless. I recognize Godard's special talent, so it would be hard to say that I wasn't influenced, but the fact is that I don't really like the overall direction of Nouvelle Vague. The reason is that you can see the director, that the auteur's ego all over it, which is a bit too individualistic when you consider what I had previously said about entertainment. So in that sense, maybe you could say I don't like it, but there's one thing that clearly had an influence on me, and that's the French actress Jeanne Moreau. Now, especially in Elevator to the Gallows, she always turns me on so much. I love her. Also, Jean Seberg in Breathless, she's American, but I love her too. If you asked me why so many auteurs have appeared in France, I would say that it comes from the French national spirit. The thing that got me thinking about was when I looked into the French Revolution and why it happened that way. There's this relationship between the high nobility and the people. It's why the nobility built themselves these huge palaces. And it seems the reason is that the French basically don't look at the common people around them. Also, there isn't just like one type of French people. They're really diverse. You could even say that the French don't actually exist. There's just a bunch of people living there. That's the conclusion I came to. Basically, it's a place where people like to blend, and it's where people from all over Europe gather, so everybody just had to come up with their own unique ways to survive. But there's one individual I truly don't understand, and that's Robespierre. I don't understand how it's possible to have absolutely no limits on your self-righteousness like he did. I don't get it. But it made me understand one thing about Putin. If Putin knew about Robespierre, he never would have invaded Ukraine. When I try to understand what was behind such carelessness, I thought it might be that when you're ruling over so many different ethnicities, you have no choice but to follow your own instincts. And that's quite a cruel fate. I guess Putin should have watched Victory Gundam then. That's true, but beyond Gundam, I've always worked by putting all these things I think about, like I just said, in my works. To be perfectly honest, that's how I could make giant robot series for 20 years without getting sick of it. But after 20 years, I realized it was only war stories, and that I was getting too old for. I finally grew tired of war stories, so I spent another 20 years wondering what I could do instead, and that's how I came to create something like Reconquista in G. That's what brought us together here today, and now I'm starting to realize that I'm going to die soon, so I want to create one last series before that. But I have no idea what I'm going to create. What I've just talked about here today just came out by itself. I might have said I hate Godard, but it's embarrassing as it might be, that I always watch his first film Breathless, at least once every 10 years. I don't know why, it's poorly made, including that pathetic last scene, but who cares, I like it. In that sense, I like it more than Forbidden Planet. Basically both Jeanette Seberg and Jean-Paul Belmondo, they're so incredibly sexy, and they have this wonderful way that they talk. That makes me think that maybe Godard wasn't entirely wrong. He was too smart, but he went to rather intellectual places, but he's always liked women, and if he liked women that much, why did it become that way? Basically what I don't like is that he became a big director. Am I wrong? No, I completely agree with you. Anyway, I didn't expect to have this talk with you today. I just mentioned that Elevator to the Gallows. I love this film. But it's the film that Louis Malle made afterwards, Zaze dans la Metro, that made me realize how difficult being a director is. What I mean is that after you make such simple love and criminal drama, Malle kept directing and kind of lost his aim. That's tough, to be a director when you have such a clearly defined orientation. That's what I learned from Louis Malle. Maybe you can be a film director without a clear sense of where you're going. That's it for Louis Malle. That reminds me of another film I really like. Alright, it's Amelie. I love that one. It really left a huge impression on me. Just as strong as the one Jean Seberg left. That's what movies are all about, but I'm not talking about Gundam at all, am I? No problem. This was a very interesting talk. Thank you for your time. Hey, I should be the one saying that. This was so stimulating for me. As I said, I never get to talk about this with foreign fans. Also, we agreed on a lot of things, and you helped me remember the things I forgot, so thank you very much. Actually, an anime friend told us that if we were to interview you, we had to get angry. I'm terribly sorry, as it seems that we failed. I'm not that young anymore. I've softened up with age. Okay, wow. After finishing that, my mind's a little bit blank because I really turned into Tomino for a second. But now I really want to go check out some more French New Wave films, especially Godard. I don't think I've actually seen any of the films he mentioned. So, all right, future MB, write down a list of all the films he mentioned. And now I guess I'm going to look up and see if I can find them. But yeah, that was a pretty awesome and base take from Tomino about why Ideon is so good and, Sigmund Freud and France. So good job, Tomino. All right, I'm out of here. Later.